GoodBuy, the show where we tell you about a thing and whether or not you should actually buy that thing. Today, we're reviewing Persona 5 Tactica, as written by Stacey Henley.
Well, look at you. Care to introduce yourself, party crasher?
You know when you're fighting the final boss and you think you have them beat, only for them to summon a new form and put you through an even tougher battle? Whether this feels frustrating or rewarding is often less about how satisfying the boss phase itself is, and more about the context around it. In Persona 5 Tactica, it's not just one more form you have to take on with the final boss, but instead, it's about 10 extra levels thrown in like sawdust in the meatloaf, stretching out a game that just won't end. I love Persona 5 and its self-made ecosystem of pseudo-sequels and spin-offs to fill the silence before Persona 6 arrives, but Tactica may be one game too far for the Phantom Thieves. Tactica transports the turn-based Persona gameplay onto a battle grid system, playing like Mario and Rabbids, Fire Emblem, or XCOM. The problem is, it's unsure if it wants to be an introduction to the genre, a middle-of-the-road entry, or an outside-of-the-box experiment. Each level has 3 stars you can earn, one for beating the level, one for beating it in a set number of turns, and one for something else like not getting anybody knocked out or using a special attack. Most of the time, I was getting all 3 on the first try, and it wasn't until the final slew of levels where actual tactics came into play that I found myself straining against the turn limit. It's a fairly basic version of the genre at heart. Each character has their default persona, and rather than Joker unlocking more, all of the thieves can add one other persona to theirs, swapping out as they level up, to unlock more attacks. A skill tree also allows the likes of Arsene to get stronger, but there's not much in the way of type advantage. Instead, the status effects limit movement or knock opponents out of cover. It means there's a limited difference between each character, and at least up until the mid-game, you'll be focusing on guns most of the time anyway. The Phantom Thieves have always been armed, but the focus here makes it feel less like a Persona game than you'd want for what might be a goodbye to the team for real this time. They're armed, but not exactly dangerous. Tactica is heavily reliant on the cover mechanic, which means so long as you're next to a barrier, you're considered covered. That means if you run up to an enemy and shoot them in the face, if their back is against the wall, they will count as being in cover and your damage is limited. What you're supposed to do is give them a melee attack so they bounce off the wall, leaving them exposed for someone else to shoot. If you shoot an enemy not in cover, you get an extra turn, which is why the game makes you work for it. But with mechanics so focused on movement, it can feel unfair that you're restricted for ambushing foes. The crown jewel of this movement-based play is the triple threat. Tactica's answer to Persona 5's all-out attack, which is worth the price of admission. When you knock an enemy down, you can surround it in a triangle to deal huge damage. Early on, it's not that interesting. Later on, however, you can plan ahead and send characters to far corners of the map and use an all-out attack to wipe out 10 enemies at once. Lining one up successfully feels like you've finally unlocked the game's potential. The one place Tactica stops and makes you think are in its quests. There are missions which progress the story forward and must be completed to beat the story, then quests which are optional side challenges. The first one is mandatory as the game explains how they work, but the rest can be avoided entirely. They're by far the hardest part of the whole experience though, and what will most make you feel like you're playing a tactical RPG. Gameplay here is less broad than the simplified Fire Emblem XCOM trappings of the main missions, and instead hones in on what makes Tactica unique. The best one sees you use other characters to knock enemies out of cover in strategic patterns, so another new and entirely unique character can use the one more turn to make their way across the map in a single move. This character's name is Arena, a new Phantom Thief who arrives in Tactica, except she's not quite a Phantom Thief as she can't use a persona. Toshiro, an adult politician, also shambles along with the cast. Narratively, these two are the stars, which is a strange choice for a game that exists to capitalize on the obvious popularity of Joker and the gang. Arena fits in well enough, and once Toshiro gets over his early few hours of constantly talking about Anne and her red latex catsuit, who is 16 by the way, his story works. The culmination of their tale, or what should be the culmination, except for the aforementioned second stage, which is actually 10 more levels, hits you in the emotional solar plexus. But, my god does it take an age to get there. In between battles, we're served a mix of animated cutscenes, which are amazing but incredibly rare, voice discussions, which are pretty solid, and endless, soundless, text-based conversations where characters take forever to make their point, occasionally forcing you to participate by making Joker answer a yes or no question with 3 options: yes, sure, and okay. Persona 5 Tactica is undone by the fact it's unsure if it's putting the Persona twist on the tactical grid game or using Persona characters to introduce newcomers to the genre. Maps and missions are repetitive, but the more interesting elements that each Persona brings are sanded off, and there's an over-reliance on basic gun and melee attacks that don't suit the Phantom Thieves at all. But when it clicks, there is an unmistakable charm about the Phantom Thieves themselves. And drawn out though they may be, the epic scale of the bosses is a good shake-up for the genre. It's not the perfect goodbye of Strikers, but it is a sign that the sun should set on the Phantom Thieves in peace.